Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Hey, welcome everybody to episode 4. And did someone say mushrooms? I'm your podcast host, Joe Metler, and today we're going to be talking about mushroom hunting. When I think of mushrooms, I have two different types of feelings. One, mushrooms in my food. I do enjoy mushrooms to some extent. I like them chopped up kind of small, get the chunks too big. Give me a stuffed mushroom, I'm not a huge fan. But when somebody says, did someone say mushrooms, and are referring to foraging or hunting, I'm all about it. So today I have my brother Lawrence, who's also a fellow forager. He'll be joining us today here to talk about how we got into mushroom hunting. Hi, Lawrence.
Hello, everybody.
So why don't you just take a quick minute here to introduce yourself?
My name is Lawrence, as Joe said. I'm his younger brother. I am the second to last. So I'm about 10 years younger than Joe.
It's been a hot minute, huh?
I think so. So currently I'm in Bismarck, but I'm moving to Minnesota soon. So I'm excited to be closer to Joe and to family to enjoy some experiences such as mushroom hunting. So,
like Lawrence said, he's the second youngest. The youngest is 5 years younger than him. So yeah, Lawrence, he's the 1,000-point scorer, track athlete, state of Minnesota competitor. So he's probably one of the more athletic ones back in the day. But he is also one of the fellow agriculturalists. Like I mentioned, David and I went to school for crop and weed / horticulture. Lawrence went to school for range science, so still kind of based in the plants. So NDSU is where he also went to school. Why don't you share quick, Lawrence, where you went from NDSU and kind of how you're coming back full circle to Minnesota real quick?
Yeah, so I went to NDSU for range science, which is work with grasslands, grazing, natural resources. After college, I moved to Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota, and I was working with an environmental company. And recently, I accepted a position with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, as an opportunity to move closer to family, since my wife and I have a young son, so it's just nicer to get closer to both of the grandparents. So
yeah, so we could look forward to Lawrence coming back to central Minnesota, joining us over here. He'll be pretty close to my brother Michael over in that neck of the woods. So I believe I first got into mushroom hunting or foraging. It was either the spring of 2017 or the spring of 2018. I had moved back from Alaska and temporarily living at my parents' farm again there for a little bit. And our neighbor Joel, who we have mentioned in this podcast before, as living on my mom's mother's or previous farmstead. So that's where Joel resides. And one day he came over, or maybe he gave me a call or text, I'm not really sure. But he asked me if I wanted to go around his pasture looking for morel mushrooms. And I don't know, the idea of finding mushrooms is really enticing, I guess. Maybe cooking them not so much, perhaps. But I was pretty excited to go over there and to find these morel mushrooms. And so we went out there. And I guess it's a clarifier for anybody new to mushroom hunting that the first time you go out searching for morel mushrooms, if you don't have spots that you kind of know where they're at, you may not get very lucky and find a whole lot. But anyways, Joel had some spots on his pasture farm area that he knew had morel mushrooms. And so it was just a matter of hitting the right timing of the year for him to find them. Or if they're there at all that year, you'll know. So we went out there with a bag, and usually you don't want to grab a sack that, will retain moisture or anything like that. Sometimes a paper bag might be or like kind of as they give them to you in the store that way. But Joel told me that if you want to collect mushrooms, you should really have like a mesh bag, so it'll allow the spores to still kind of fall to the ground if there's some spores left in the mushrooms. So as you're walking around, you're kind of spreading your spores, and I'm not sure if the mushrooms were to the point where they're producing spores, but that was kind of the theory behind the bag that we chose, is that just in case if they were a little bit on the more ripe side, that they'd be spreading their spores. Anyway, so we're out in the pastures, my grandpa's old stomping grounds there, and trying to find these mushrooms. And as we were walking around the pasture, we were looking for these wooded areas, kind of that were somewhat open, so they weren't so densely wooded, but they kind of had some nice grass, kind of understory is kind of where we were looking at. And yeah, we must have walked home that day with 12 to 15 different mushrooms, morel mushrooms, and so that was pretty cool. It was my first experience into morel mushrooms, and we brought some home, cleaned them up a little bit, and basically just soaked them in some vinegar water, getting rid of any bugs or insects that might be inside the mushroom, letting them float to the top, and then rinsing out the mushrooms. And I think we grilled them up and put them on top of some burgers, so that was really tasty and delicious. But Lawrence wasn't with me, so I think it was the following year that Lawrence was still at the farm place there, and I went back and I just wanted to try to find mushrooms on the farmstead, so we wanted to go walk around the woods and find the mushrooms. And so for some reason, Lawrence, you decided to come with.
It's kind of like a scavenger hunt, so I thought it'd be pretty fun.
Lawrence likes a challenge. I mentioned before that Dad has about 460 acres. Probably half or a little bit less than half that's wooded. So we had a lot of area that we could walk and check. And so many of you are wondering, well, how do you determine where to go look?
So it sounds like mushrooms in general have different trees and different plants they have symbiotic relationships with. Neighbor Joel was telling us when we're walking through our woods that typically people would find, at least in the central Minnesota region, morel mushrooms by dead elm trees or ash trees.
Oftentimes, I guess, when they're dead, they're kind of wherever that log had laid, right, over time. It's kind of close to that area or around the base of the trees, right, where the roots kind of come out. As the elm tree is dying, it's still maybe upright. I found that the upright ones that are kind of starting to rot along the roots and where the roots go is where you'll find the morel mushrooms. If the tree is already toppled over, it might be a little bit too late to find them, it seems like. So that's that symbiotic relationship. Once the elm tree is too far gone, you may not find the morel mushrooms either.
And as I recall, Joe, I don't know if you found too many morel mushrooms on our farm yet. I think I've been the only one to find them out there. You found other mushrooms, but I don't think you found any morels yet.
No, I haven't. So we have that little 2-acre orchard / vineyard area at our farm, and just to the west of there, we were able to find a patch. And I think Lawrence was the one who found the patch, and that's kind of like our indicator spot. We go back there every time to go look to see if they're there yet or not. And if they're not, then it doesn't really pay to go look a whole lot of other places. Whereas if they are there right away, then we know it's time to start looking some more. So we haven't located too many other spots yet, but I have found a couple of other mushrooms on the farm. So another common one that we find is pheasant's back, I believe it's called. And that's kind of the ones that actually grow. It grows on the log of the tree. I'm not sure if I really noticed what types of trees they were, but usually a little bit more decaying. They're not usually on live trees too much. Find them a lot on stuff that's laying down. But they're pretty easily identified, and I'll show some pictures or send some pictures to the show notes. You guys can take a look at those. So those have been really good to find. The problem is they're usually a little bit after or before the morel mushrooms, I've kind of noticed. Like once we're out there and we're finding our morel mushrooms on the farm, the pheasant backs are almost like too big or too far gone. So as a general rule, if it's kind of bigger than your fist, the pheasant back's probably too far gone. It might be a little bit hard, and it's just not very tasty at that point. But I have found some that are like, twice the size of my fist that have been really soft yet. And so it kind of all just depends on the softness and the firmness of that mushroom. And as you kind of go and try it, you'll know from experience there on after, when it's a good time to actually cut those up and harvest those.
What do you usually use the pheasant back mushrooms for, Joe, as far as cooking and eating?
Yeah, that's a good one that I've kind of just cubed up, because it's not really like spindly or anything like that. So I usually just cube them up and saute them a little bit of sauce, a little bit of vinegar, and then I'll put them on a burger or something like that. It's usually what I've done. So, or like on a hot dog, put a little sprinkle of a little bit of mushrooms, on the hot dog or whatever. So
another mushroom that I know we have on the farm that I haven't looked for yet after, getting into the mindset of foraging for mushrooms is, I think we just call them puffballs.
Oh, yeah.
The puffballs, I remember younger, just, you'd find one in the fall and you'd just kick it because it just all the powder, the spores would just spray out everywhere.
Yeah.
And I heard that probably in the spring or maybe into June, but when you pick them and you cut them, you got to make sure it's just all firm, no powder. Mm-hmm. If it's a little yellow, it's probably too far gone. It just has to be all white in the center. And I think I've seen recipes for like pizza crusts and stuff with those.
I have heard from some of my foraging friends that those puffballs are actually really good and really tasty. Yeah, you can just almost cut them up into a steak and then, use them as like a little pizza platter kind of thing and put your sauce on top and your other meats or whatever you want to do. But yeah, I heard those are really tasty. So I mentioned I don't really like the texture of mushrooms, but that's more like your portobello stuff that you get from the store. For some reason, I taste the morel mushrooms, grill them up a little bit. They just taste better. And maybe it's just because I found them myself. But I do enjoy eating the mushrooms that I found. And last year, oh man, I found like the primo mushroom for like our area. That's not really super easy to find or not really prevalent in central Minnesota. And that was a white oyster mushroom. And I was pretty stoked about it. And usually I send a picture to my friend of mine that I know, and she'd tell me, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, you can eat that one. You got to be careful, know your stuff, know a friend. You can't eat everything you pick up. But so we found these mushrooms, and I was super stoked about it. And she reminded me, hey, just soak them in some vinegar water or something. Make sure any of the critter crawlies and things can come out if there are any. And this mushroom looked pristine, though. So I was like, man, I don't even know if I want to wash this. But you know what? I'm going to toss it in some vinegar water here and see what happens. And my wife, Nora, goes over there a little later and says, Joe, why are these little black dots moving around in the mushroom? I'm like, what? And I go and I take one out and I'm like, I see these little black heads moving, and there were little maggots in my mushrooms, and they were everywhere. And once it soaked a little bit, you kind of see all these little tunnels where they're burrowing to get out. And I don't know if they hatched between when I picked the mushroom or when I soaked it, but we were super disappointed and didn't get to eat that one. But I was told that those mushrooms will grow back in the same spot. So I'm pretty stoked to go check that out. And I think they come in a little bit earlier than the morels. So I need to get Dad to go take a look out there this weekend. So Lawrence, you mentioned something about tracker that you can use to, like, are we in prime mushroom hunting time for morel mushrooms right now?
Well, I was looking around outside yesterday, and obviously mushrooms, they like to grow in more humid climates. They need moisture, they need heat, and it's just too dry right now. Under the leaves and everything in the park, it was just bone dry, it seemed like. But like I said earlier, usually mid-May in central Minnesota would be about the right time. So we're coming up on the right time. We just need some rain and then some humidity, some heat, because we haven't had the warmest spring yet. That's one thing that's been lacking, which I was really hoping it would be a good year for mushrooms because of the moisture we had this winter for snow melt. But I don't think it's exactly the right time yet. I think we're supposed to get some rain the next week here, and I think we'll be good to go to look out for some mushrooms.
Yeah, well, over in eastern North Dakota here around Fargo and western Minnesota, we're getting some rain today. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking about walking around your woods, with this rain this weekend, early next week, you might get some popping, I think. If not early in the week, for surely by next weekend or Mother's Day weekend, So I think that's when we're going to be looking, is over Mother's Day weekend, and get some good luck on our side. So,
and there is a website that has a map. If you're looking for morel mushrooms, the greatmorel.com, there's a map on there, and there's a way to submit sightings of, when you find a morel. Say, hey, I found some, and you can put a pinpoint, and it you can look at it and you can see the line go up from, Iowa up to Minnesota, and be like, all right, they're finding them in Iowa. It'll be soon. Once we start getting warm enough, it'll be popping up soon. So there's a couple in southern Minnesota, but not quite in central Minnesota yet.
Yeah, so if you are listening and you're from southern Minnesota, get out there this weekend after the rain. Probably coming up. They're coming and they're on their way. Looking forward to it. Also keep an eye out for some of those other mushrooms and things. I do recall, Lawrence, you got like a mushroom book of some sorts for Christmas this past year. Have you found that to be a very useful resource for you?
Yeah, for For a starting guide, because I'm just getting into this sort of thing, just kind of knowing the background of how mushroom foraging started and that type of thing, and what kind of tools, what you should wear, and what all that type of stuff is good to know. I know you mentioned earlier about the bag that you guys use, the mesh bag. That's good because I've learned that if you use a plastic bag, the mushrooms sweat in plastic and it kind of decays them faster. So don't use a plastic bag if you want to preserve your mushrooms. Use a mesh, cloth, wax paper, something like that. Don't use plastic. So it's very helpful for little tips to know.
And don't be discouraged if you don't find anything. You sometimes, even though you know they're there on that tree, for example, when we were out there with Joel, we were out there looking around this tree, and he's like, this is a tree, I know it is, this is the one that it is. And, maybe they're just not here yet. And you'll look and look and look, and all of a sudden, boom, you pop, you'll see one. Next thing you know, there's one, and there's one, and there's one. Once you get your eyes acclimated to it, kind of like anything when it comes to hunting or scouting for animals and things too, even, that you'll get an eye for it and you'll figure it out.
Especially when you're looking for mushrooms on the ground, because they seem like they're more camouflaged than your pheasant back that's on the tree, or even the puffball, because I usually find that or have seen that in pastures, with green grass. So it's a little different. But when there's leaves and it's wooded and there's mushrooms on the ground, it just seems like it's harder to spot them.
And they're not bright orange. Like if anybody hasn't seen morel mushrooms, they're basically like a little miniature brain that's like skin colored. And so to find it on like brown dead grass that hasn't grown yet much this spring, it's kind of hard sometimes. So once the green grass comes up, they almost kind of stick out just a little bit more. So, but yeah, looking forward to doing that this weekend. I also had another surprise find this weekend, and that was as I was driving around town here, I saw a garden center called Holland's that relocated from Minnesota side of the Red River to the Fargo side. And I went there and picked up some different plants and raspberries and things. And I was very excited about it and the presence there. I kind of happened upon it. But it was a very good place. They're very helpful, knowledgeable individuals. So a little shout out to those guys who just opened up this week. So go check them out. And yeah, have a good time. But anyways, yeah. Is there anything else, Lawrence, you got for us?
Yeah, I just want to quick disclaimer, as Joe mentioned on before, there are poisonous mushrooms. So make sure you do your research. There are false morels as well. So make sure you look up the difference between false morels and morels. Yeah, just want to make sure everybody is safe. You're always supposed to keep one mushroom intact when you collect mushrooms, so you have an idea. If you do get sick, bring it to the emergency room or whatever to be, this is what I ate, or just to have a comparison to what you had intact before you started cooking stuff.
Like I said, always find a friend or be very confident in your decisions. So good luck to all of you guys who are out there who are going to be foraging in the woods. Watch out for the wood ticks. I'm sure they're out. So anyways, yeah, till next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
See ya.
See ya.